We're really thrilled today that our good friend Bob Alter is here to talk about his good friend, Mr. Imagination. We also have on our panel today Sherry Siegel, who happens to be Bob's wife, but was also a wonderful friend of Mr. Imagination's, and they are both avid collectors of his work, and we are very indebted to them, among others of you that are here today, for the wonderful exhibit that we have out in the two galleries. Also on the panel today are Mike Noland, who is an artist, great friend of Intuit, great friend of Mr. Imagination, and Cleo Wilson, who is the Intuit board president, great friend to Mr. Imagination. So I'm going to start with Joel telling you what's up first.
Okay, first we have the video from Extreme Homes. It's a clip of Mr. Imagination's home in the 90s when he was still living on Clark Street. So this is a little glimpse that Bob really wanted to show you guys before he starts his presentation. So please indulge. Oh, and make sure you turn off your cell phones, please. And make sure you know where the restrooms are, just around the corner to your right in the study gallery. Yes, please, Cleo. Thank you.
Welcome back to Extreme Homes. Our next story takes us to Chicago, where a very prolific creator has transformed his environment into a work of art. Has been an artist since he was a little boy. For the last 20 years or so, he's been known to most as Mr. Imagination, Mr. I for short.
I'm a self-taught artist. They would call me a visionary artist. Then they have this term where they would call artists such as myself outsiders, which that's a term that I really don't like.
Maybe untraditional is a better word. Whatever you call it, though, his style has made him famous. In fact, he's represented by one of the most prestigious galleries in Chicago, and the Smithsonian owns several of his pieces. As you might expect, his home reflects his unusual style. Unlike some artists who require serenity for inspiration, he craves stimulation. So, some 15 years ago, when he found an apartment on one of the city's busiest streets, he knew he was home. Like his art, the place defies convention, a storefront crossed with an art salon.
Of course, back then it was not a lot of restaurants. It was not a tourist area. But I like this neighborhood. I like this building because it's like a building that's about 100 years old.
And the extreme proximity of two Chicago L tracks didn't worry him too much.
For a while, I was talking on the phone and said, hold on, the L is going to come by. But then I got kind of used to it, but I always just put in my mind that the L is not there, and I don't hear it.
The apartment had one very appealing attraction, a landlord who would let him put his stamp on the place. So instead of a nameplate on the door, Mr. I lets his friends know how to find him in a more graphic way. Over the years, Mr. I has transformed the very stairs that lead up to his apartment, sometimes asking fellow artists to contribute a square. In fact, Mr. I has pretty much taken over the interior of the building, turning every inch into a work of art. Right now, we're headed downstairs to a huge space that the landlord made available to him after he'd been there a while. Mr. I calls it his workspace, but it's more like a museum. One entire room down here is devoted to a collection of rocking horses and children's toys. An adjacent small parlor is the ideal place to peruse the gamut of Mr. I's output. Another room on this level is his sandstone carving studio. It's one of the art forms he's done the longest. He offered to sculpt a very special piece just for us, and we'll see it later when it's finished.
It's done with a nail and a hacksaw. I did lots of the sandstone heads, but there's so many things that can be made out of the stone.
The huge basement space is also where he keeps some of his treasures, an uncatalogued accumulation of art and collectibles. All told, it's a space that's jam-packed with inspiration and history.
There's old books and very old magazines, newspapers. I just have lots of stuff. And then I have way over 4,000 or 5,000 pieces of my own work.
It's a good thing he doesn't share these rooms with anyone. And that's even more true in his upstairs living space, which gives new meaning to the concept of extreme. We'll go there next. Welcome back to Extreme Homes. We're about to see the extraordinary environment that Gregory Warmack created for himself within a sprawling apartment on Chicago's North Side. Most people know him as Mr. I, short for the very apt Mr. Imagination. Guests enter through a door that hints at what's to come, but even so, they're generally unprepared.
They're shocked. They are totally shocked once they come here, and sometimes they would come back here, and then the second time say, "Now, was that here?" I said, "That was here, the last time it was here." So because there's so many things that you can see.
In the back of the apartment is the salon where Mr. I likes to relax.
It's like a meditation place. It's like a huge shrine, and it's like a museum here too. Lots of these pieces are from younger, upcoming artists.
Mr. I entertains friends amid this ever-changing array of art and collectibles with plenty of seating on chairs. He calls them thrones that he made out of a variety of materials, including old cigarette packs. Some of the pieces here hold special meaning for him, like the ashtray sculpture which actually inspired him to start working with bottle caps. But if Mr. I is home alone, he's rarely in here.
I would just mainly stay in the front and work.
And for Mr. I, that's pretty much a 24/7 occupation. And the rest of his apartment reflects his priorities in a way that's more than a trifle extreme. His bathroom, for example, is a place to keep not just towels and shaving cream. His kitchen appears quite normal, fully stocked and ready for cooking. But why do that? There are plenty of restaurants in the neighborhood, so instead of preparing food in his kitchen, Mr. I's found another handy use for it, as a place to store wood and a substitute for a workbench. And he used to have a bedroom here, but a few years ago he converted it into a storage area for his supplies. So now he sleeps in the front room of the house where he also does his work. But spotting his bed isn't easy. When we visited, he was busy preparing for an upcoming show at Chicago's Terra Museum of American Art. And he had no place to keep some flowers he created other than on top of his bed. When it's time to sleep, he does have to go through quite a bit of trouble to lie down. That's okay with the prolific Mr. I. He lives to work, and he's reconfigured his apartment to fit his unconventional needs.
I do my paintbrushes in the front room. I build all my thrones in the front room. Just about all those different artworks I have done in the past, and I have kind of made right in that small spot.
It's hard, actually, to separate the man from his art and the art from his home. Everything is a reflection of Mr. I's imagination, right down to the bottle cap-clad clothing he wears. When he's not here working, he's often out making his rounds, collecting the items that go into adorning his apartment and into his sculpture. And he's always looking for new ways to transform his apartment. Other artists just buy new canvases, but Mr. I puts his vision on every aspect of the rooms that shelter him. He can't deny that art has literally taken over his life. And although he complains that he's running out of room and may have to move, he's still actively accumulating stuff.
Being an artist, working with found objects, I never turn nothing down.
While some people might think he's a little wacky, he protests that he's simply a guy who knows what he likes.
I'm not a sports type of a person, but I love doing art. And also, it's making others happy. One is to actually see it, and it's also recycling. This space is like a huge time capsule. But one day I will not have to leave it because of all of the work that I have here. I need a larger space.
To create very special pieces like this one. Perhaps Mr. I's next move will be to a warehouse-sized place. But even if it were as big as a football field, it's safe to assume it would wind up just as bizarre as his current home. I hope you enjoyed the homes we visited today. They prove there's no limit to the creativity that some people of. So join us next time on Extreme Homes, where the only thing you can expect is the unexpected.
Okay. I'd like to welcome Mr. Bob Alter, who will now lead us in discussion. All right.
I want to thank Intuit for having this. Thanks to Deb, Jan Petrie, who I don't think is here, who's the head of the exhibits, the education committee, and of the exhibits, and Jerry Steffel. Also, Lenny, who's in the back, was a registrar for this show with over 200 pieces from all over the country, which is probably an unbelievably complicated task. And I really appreciate all the work he did in doing that. This was originally done when Mr. I was invited by Intuit to give a presentation in Art Chicago in 2007. That year they had a show where they had multiple different venues within the merchandise mart, and one of them was Intuit's. And so I suggested to Mr. I, who had moved to Bethlehem 5 years earlier, that maybe he'd like to give his talk based on slides. And at first he said no, but he later changed his mind. So since that time, I've just updated this at different times. There was a presentation at SOFA a few years ago. Gave a presentation at Brower Museum where we had a show. And so I'm just constantly updating this that we just have a chronicling of his career. This is combined chronological and thematic, so it's a little bit of a mishmash, and so I apologize if it's sort of all over the place. Another thing is I don't speak very loudly, so if you don't hear me, I'm sure my wife will let me know, but you can shout out. Mr. I, as was mentioned in the video, did not like the term outsider. This was a super sociable person. He had his own business card. He craved technology. He had a cell phone before most people had cell phones. He would be talking on it, and you're with him, and he'd hand you the phone and say, "Here, talk to Norman," or "Who's Norman?" And he would just do this stuff all the time. He had a tremendous amount of pride in his work, and was also quite a showman, and he balanced that out. So this is a piece that he did, and this is the back of the piece, and over here it says, this is named after my brother Sherman. Down here shows his little logo that he used in many of his work. He often signed things one of a kind, USA. My real name is Gregory Warmack. Over here, I don't know if you can see it, made of wood, nails, plaster, Paris, wire, etc., and imagination. He also really thought it was important to be more than just an artist, so he collected things. You saw in the video, he collected antiques. He got things from artists who were, in a formative era. He liked to mentor them. He also liked to mentor children, and did a lot of things teaching kids. This is his signature. The I stands for Mr. Imagination. He viewed himself as a visionary, and certainly the I goes along with that. his name, Mr. Imagination, it's not really clear where it came from. He thought that somebody who was seeing him do his sandstone in the late 70s said, why you have a wild imagination and your name should be Mr. Imagination, and he thinks that's how it started. And many people call him Mr. I for short, so I, the letter I, and also E-Y-E-I. There was an article in a newspaper from the South Side from the 1970s, and what was described as he walked into this bank, and he was selling jewelry, which is what he did at that time. And these are lines from that article. I never had any classes, it's just a gift. He classified himself as an entertainer, tap dancer, tailor, lamp designer, singer, and writer. And in that article, he says, one day the public and the nation will know about the work I'm doing. And for those of you who knew Mr. I over time, he always referred to that line that people will know about the work he's doing. A short time after that article, Mr. I was shot in a robbery, was almost killed. He was in a coma for 6 weeks and had a very long recuperation afterwards. This is Mr. I's depiction of him being in the coma, where this is Mr. I in a creation. He shows himself as a Egyptian pharaoh. Interestingly, he put in here the nail that he used to carve this out. This piece is in the show if you want to look at it afterwards. Short time before this, Mr. I recalls that he was in his mother's house, and he was looking in a mirror, and he had this vision of seeing himself in a regal outfit. I look like a king. And there's a lot of mythology about what happened when he was in the coma, and there are all these different quotes that you can read in the many different articles written about Mr. I. Mr. I was quoted by Tom Patterson saying, while I was going through a bright light, I had the feeling that I was traveling through the past. It all comes from this coma. I never did this Egyptian work before. And out-of-body experience in which he saw images of ancient culture. So after that, he started doing work with sandstone, which we'll get into in a little bit. He had an apartment that he moved into, and unfortunately, it's either March 29th or March 30th, depending on who you read. In 1982, there was a fire. March 30th is his birthday, so it's sort of interesting that we heard different versions of this. But basically, he had a lot of his work was damaged or destroyed. Things were stolen, and then he moved into this other apartment in 1983. Unfortunately, we have these great photos by Sherry Eisenberg, who's sitting in the front, that shows that apartment. There's burnt pieces of sandstone here. He made sort of a shrine. For those of you who remember, 1983 is when Harold Washington got elected. I don't know why he did a thing for Bernie Epping, but we're not going to talk about that. And here are some of these burned pieces over here. This is Carl Hammer, who was introduced to Mr. I at this time. He had heard about Mr. I from an antique dealer on the north side. As probably most of you know, Carl was instrumental in Mr. I's career, became his gallerist. Many museum shows were set up through Carl Hammer, and this just shows when he first met Mr. I. This is a space that I'm not exactly certain where this was, but it's done at the same time. It shows Mr. I doing his sandstone work and shows some of his sandstones here. Another great photo by Sherry Eisenberg. And this shows that entire space. And you see not only the work, but how he spatially designed it and put it in. It's just really remarkable. A couple years later, though, he decided to move to the north side. So he moved to this house that we just saw in the video. These are the photos that everybody knows about Mr. I. They were taken by Ron and Gordon in that space. Here's another one. In the back room, you get a chance. There are photos of Ron Gordon, Sherry's, Dimitri, and Link Harper. This led to Mr. I getting some really major shows. The first very important show was one that was done at the Dallas Museum that featured contemporary and black artists from the past. Mr. I had a large number of sandstone pieces in this. This piece is one of his major pieces, and which is also in the show. There's also a show at the Illinois State Museum that Bob Sill curated, featuring the paintbrushes. The Terra Museum had a show with Mr. I, David Philpott, and Ken Ward. And this is if you are interested in Mr. I, the book from the show is readily available on various used book sites. The essay by Tom Patterson really gives a detail about the early part of Mr. I's life, not to speak of really good pictures. Now I want to get a little bit into sandstone. Sandstone is a byproduct of the steel industry. When they made molds, they would put sand around it and heat it, and it would get fused and would make these solid pieces of stone. And Mr. I first found this near where he lived on the south side. He took some home, just sort of was working with it. He was actually using it to make the sand break down, and he put it on the roof of little houses he was making, but then he realized he could make shapes out of it and carve into it. This is the piece that's in the Smithsonian, the sandstone. The Smithsonian is now called the Smithsonian American Art Museum. This piece is the mate. This is an Indian woman. This is an Indian man. This piece is in the show. You can see it afterwards. This shows his sandstone studio on Clark Street. This piece is in the show, and this piece is in the show. This is a fabulous sandstone totem that Mr. I made. This is in the collection of Intuit. This is also in the show. This is a series of photos taken by Roger Haas Roach, who's the daughter of Maggie Roach, who was somebody who was a good friend of Mr. I's. And Roger just took these pictures showing Mr. I making a sandstone piece. So you can see he has a little piece of metal, and he's just sort of shaving down the sandstone. Here's this little piece of metal over here. This is something that's a different piece of sort of a triangular piece of metal where he carves out the face. And lo and behold, he has his final piece. This is actually a very small piece, but shows how much detail he could work in. So this is a cityscape of Chicago with the Hancock and the L. And this is a really small little piece, and he had just tremendous facility with this medium. In the late 80s, Lisa Stone gave Mr. I a large bucket of bottle caps that her brother collected. And Mr. I took these and made clothing out of it. In the back, there's a picture that Sherry took of Mr. I in a Halloween costume, and he used the bottle caps to make the Halloween costume. Of course, he won first prize in that. And given where he lived, on the north side near Wrigley Field, he had ready access to bottle caps from thereafter. A little bit later, he also started recycling his paintbrushes. This is just an early piece. The date on this says 86, although it may be misdated, but it just shows how he was using the brushes and bottle caps. This is one of his favorite pieces, showing bottle caps. This was in a calendar that Mr. I was really proud of. This piece is in the show. This is a photo of the installation in today's show. And when you look, you can just see all these different forms that Mr. I did with bottle caps. There's a cape here. The back of this piece has a cape that's coming up. This was a piece we just saw. This is things around a bowling pin. And it's just really remarkable how many different ways he could build the bottle caps. This is something where there are layers of bottle caps to make a frame. Some more unbelievable pieces, frames. This is a table covered with bottle caps and paintbrushes in here from Cleo's collection. With the paintbrushes, these are early brushes. Mr. I told Sherry Eisenberg that these were his first 5 brushes, she was able to acquire them. If you look, they just have little painted eyebrows. This is not very sophisticated in here. And we later asked Mr. I, and he sort of hedged and hawed, but we're pretty sure these are the first brushes, so thanks to Sherry, she got them, and she took this great picture. This one's probably a little bit later because it's a little bit built up. This is the installation out there. You know, Martha Henry, who did an unbelievable job of curating the show, tried to get examples of different brushes. So there's everything from toothbrushes to paintbrushes to brooms, you name it, and it's in here. This isn't bottle caps, these are buttons, but the same basic principle. This is a piece that's in the American Folk Art Museum. Whenever there's a blurry photo, it means I couldn't download it any better. It's not the photographer. This actually was in the video that you saw, this horse. He loved the dreadlocks. And this is what piece that he always, when he did shows, he would like to bring to the show. These are staffs, which are another vehicle that he used. And these are multimedia. He started doing plaster of Paris sculptures around 1990. These are built on an armature of wire, and then he would put putty or plaster of Paris on them. This is actually a self-portrait of Mr. I taking sandstone in this little black box, black suitcase to his classes that he taught. And this he called "The Couple Going to the Benefit." This piece is out front. But he could do about anything, and this is something, just a really interesting combination of paint, collage, found objects. This stuff here is cotton that's spray painted green. This is a bottle cap. There's another space age scene out there, so this is in the show. This is probably the Hancock. This is probably the Christian Science Church lacquer, but he combined it with these outer space scenes. Mr. I found large cylinders and made these gigantic totems, and this is from the show. This one here is Cleo's, and you just see the stacked up faces. When you get close to it, they're just everything you can imagine just in there. This is a slightly different thing, using more of the putty faces. Way in the back is one that's made of broom heads. Wrong thing. Let's. How do we do this? Work. Okay, we're good. This is another view of the totems here, also showing the sandstone totem. You just see there's 3 different approaches to this medium. Mr. I made these monumental thrones. He made them out of bottle caps. He built a wooden base. And so these are just 4 examples of what he did. This throne was in the MCA show in 1995, Art in Chicago, and this was, he was selected for that show, and the throne was shown. This is 2 more thrones. This photo was taken by Patty Carroll. She did a series of pieces, and this great photo. This was a throne that was in this show. They had to take it back to Atlanta but in the back room, if you go there, try to picture this throne being there. This went through fire and stuff, and so it's a little bit distressed. I don't know how many thrones he made. This one had number 7 on it. In addition to doing this kind of work, though, he made installations, and this is something, it's at the Donnelly Youth Center. Ron Gordon took this photo of the work in process, and this is the final piece here. And so he would put all of his imagery into this zone. He has an area in the House of Blues, which is over here, and these are some close-ups of that. That is still there right now. He was asked to make a bottle for the Olympics in 1996, and so this is a Coke bottle, and here's Mr. I with his I symbol. This is at House of Blues in Florida. He made this arch. Mr. I's brother, William, lived with him after a troubled existence and some time in jail. And one day, Mr. I came to his apartment, and William had tried to get into his apartment, and a window fell and crushed his neck, and so Mr. I found him dead. And this was a very traumatic thing for Mr. I. This is Mr. I's version of William. This is a photo of Mr. I and William. William was an artist of his own right. He made the cigarette seat that you saw in the video, because that would he was called Cigarette Pac-Man, and so he made these folded cigarette items, and he learned that while he was in jail. So this was very traumatic for Mr. I. Many people helped him to get through this period afterwards, but he got through it. And the next year he was featured on the cover of Raw Vision. There's an article on him. He was very proud of this. He started back working. This is a piece that's also in the show. These are from a Chicago street sweeper. He took the metal sweeper parts and embedded them in a basket. And just a really interesting piece. This is in the back room. This was photographed in Bethlehem. He participated in Cows on Parade. Of course, he not just bottle caps, but brushes, everything. This was a memory wall that he did in Winston-Salem in 1999. So he had this technique of just embedding different things, his frequent symbols, his hands. This is a piece that he did shortly before leaving Chicago. This was named after his grandmother, Anna. Again, multiple media. Another piece that he did, this was like a piece of like a heart base of a table, and he took it out and then built on the head. It has a cape in the back. Mr. I was always really liked these bottle caps with the eye in it, and when he could get them, he loved to put them on his sculpture. In 2002, Mr. I decided it was time to move on. He always said change is good. I've read different things about why he left. There was an article in the Reader around the time he left where Mr. I mentioned that there was more crime in the area that he was in. It also mentions that he was always afraid that they were going to raise the rent suddenly, and as you saw from the video, he had tons of stuff there. For him to have to move suddenly would have been unbelievably difficult. And there are also things that referred to, he thought the place was haunted since the death of his brother. So he decided to move to Bethlehem. What attracted him to Bethlehem is in 2000, he had participated in a program there. He was brought there by Norman Giardeau at Lehigh University, and he did a major presentation, was involved in students. he's written things about, he liked Bethlehem because they had all the religious references in the streets. And he just decided that it was a better place to be. It was also closer to New York City, and he thought that might be something to be good for his career. There's also greenery. And so this is where he lived. He lived in this house, it's a duplex, and he lived in this part, all floors. He was an avid gardener when he had the opportunity, so there he is gardening. This is a photo inside the house, and with his beloved dog Pharaoh. This is on the throne that we saw earlier. And here's another one of Pharaoh. This piece here is something that we'll see later. That's something that went through a fire, and you'll see how it looks, but just so you have a visual reference for it. He had a major show in Pittsburgh, and one of the things he started doing was he found pieces of wood to make legs. It gave pieces a sense of motion. He did this bus shelter in Bethlehem. He made this mule for Lehigh University. This is in the lobby of the art gallery there. This is another mule that was at called Banana Factory, which was a art collective that he participated in. He had always made fish, but he really took off making fish. This is an example of one that he made. He made baskets, so this is an umbrella stand, and this is all bottle caps. He made these larger-than-life figures. He was really proud of this. He found this garbage can and then built, I don't remember what name he gave this woman, and this out of wood. And here's Mr. I with this idea. Of course, he always had a cell phone on. He started doing dolls. Bill Glennon sent him the inner pieces from a piano, and then he used that as the framework for making the dolls. He started doing things in wire. Diane LaBelle, who was the director of the Banana Factory, saw wire work that Mr. I was doing, those armatures for plaster, and she said, just leave the things alone with the wire. And then Mr. I went on and made these elaborate dresses. This is a small one. There's a little wire in here. When he did this, he thought it would just hold it in place, but he found that if he tapped the piece, it would dance. And so he calls these his dancing dresses. This is another show he did in Las Vegas. He started doing this work. He had a series he called Watusi Men with the long necks. He loved working with nails, and I don't know timing-wise, but at one point he saw works about African art and saw fetish pieces with nails in them, and just thought he had a natural kinship for that type of art. This is another one of those pieces. He found this piece of driftwood and just made this sculpture, and here's the eye, little pyramids. His neighbor had tin in the roof and was going to throw it away. Mr. I found that this one's tin, not copper. And so he started taking that and then making fish out of them. He later got copper, and this is how he made it. He would just drill, with a nail, he'd make a hole in the piece of metal, and then he'd take a piece of metal wire and just fasten it. This is another one of these wire pieces. He was going to start a series called The Invisible Man, where there's no head, there's no body, and he never finished doing that. This was, we think, was the first one in that series. This piece is in the show. When he did it, it was on this long board. It looked like he was going down a fashion show walk. He cut it, though, because when he came to Chicago, he wanted to bring it along, so unfortunately he cut it right here, but you can see the piece out front. he started doing things with cans from fish food, and then he went, so these aren't those pieces, but then he found other objects. As you can see, when he does things, he doesn't like just do one at a time. He just really cranked them out, and it was just amazing how productive he was. He was asked to do a bathroom in Bethlehem. This was like a home decor kind of place, and they just had a bathroom in the back. So he made this bathroom. If you're interested in this on YouTube, they have a view, panoramic going around this. He participated in the Cool Globes project. This Jerry Adelman was involved in this, and Jerry Adelman has a lot of the pieces in the show. These are just some shows. This I mentioned before about he did a show in Bethlehem at Lehigh University, and this is his mother Margaret, and this just shows their installation. At that workshop, Lonnie Holly was also there, and interestingly, Lonnie Holly in Birmingham, Alabama, also found sandstone because Birmingham's a steel place. And so he started working at roughly the same time Mr. I did on sandstone. And this piece they had Lonnie and Mr. I carve on either side. So this is Lonnie's side, and this is Mr. I's side. So it's a fascinating piece. He later did this major show in Pittsburgh, which I mentioned before. This piece is in the show here. This is Mr. I talking at that show. This was that tall piece that we saw previously with Mr. I next to it. This sculpture with a mother and or grandmother and two children in the show. This is the resplendent Mr. I at that show in one of his thrones. He had a show at Eastern Illinois University. He was invited to go to Paris several times, and the La Halle Saint Pierre museum there, they had one of his balloons there. In 2006, they had an opening of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and this shows a piece that is in that museum, and Mr. I came for the opening. There's somebody named Trailer who's represented over here, and so needless to say, this was quite an important thing for Mr. I. If you're ever at that museum upstairs, they have an area called the Luce, L-U-C-E, collection, which is basically like they just have things in storage, but it's open storage, and you can see a bunch of Mr. I pieces along with many other folk artists there. There was a retrospective at Goggle Works, which is in Reading, Pennsylvania. This was done by Norman Giardot. This is a throne at that show. This was the same throne that we had here before fire. This was a show at AVAM. This is how he liked things being displayed. He would have probably put in more stuff. In 2008, the day before Martin Luther King Day, there was a catastrophic fire at his place in Bethlehem. You can see how this looked. He was in Florida at the time. Needless to say, totally traumatized. His dog, Pharaoh, was killed along with cats and other animals. This shows Mr. I with that sculpture I mentioned before, the one that he and Lonnie Holly did, that he was able to salvage out of that. This shows him with his books. This shows the African queen before fire, and this is afterwards, where it was covered with soot. This piece is in the show. Mr. I thought that the pieces that survived the fire had special significance. In his first fire, he also saved those pieces because he thought because they had survived the fire, that they had special meaning. Friends in Bethlehem put him up in a house, a small house close to where he'd been before. He did start doing some work. This was a painting that he did just in April, and the title is Fire, Water, Ice. Fire was the fire that he had. Water was what was used to put out the fire, and ice because it was January in Pittsburgh, and it all froze. And so this was an important theme to him. He did some other work. He was doing another Cool Globe for another project, but he didn't really do bottle cap things till the end of that year. Phil Wicklander, Jerry Wicklander sent Mr. I a bunch of printing pieces that they used from their printing business and commissioned him to make this piece. And it took him a long time to do, but it was really a major piece that got him going. He was asked to have this window in Bergdorf Goodman on Fifth Avenue in New York. This was done by Avium, just from his pieces. So this was after the fire, so these are pieces that survived the fire and new ones that he had made. Around that time, he had decided that maybe it was time to move on. The fire may have been had given him a symbol that it was time to move on. He was in Atlanta and he found this property. He saw this tree that just captivated him, and I don't know what the heck that is. So he decided to move to Atlanta. He purchased his property, but unfortunately it flooded, and so he was put up in this other property that was close by. This is I'm sorry if it's a blurry photo, but this shows what the place looked like early on when Mr. I was there. And then Mr. I, the gardener, the designer, made this the Garden of Peace. He did all this stuff with making walkways, the root sculpture. He put cement things with his Egyptian figures in it. There are objects on the wall that he made. This is him inside that new property with the burnt piece. He started doing more carving. He'd done carving when he was a young person, but he hadn't really done wood carving until he was back in Atlanta. This is a piece he did that was in the show, which unfortunately I had to go back to Atlanta, where he carved out all these little pieces and constructed this walking bird. This is a piece outside of the building. Just shows just a different temperament. He used these twigs and things and made this figure on the wall. In 2011, he, along with Kevin Sampson, Charlie Lucas, and Lonnie Holly, were invited to go to the Venice Biennale. Martha Henry coordinated that. Unfortunately, there were some money problems, and Benetton sort of dropped out, but somehow the whole thing went on, and Mr. I was there and able to participate fully. He came back. He had an accident where he got his hip injured, and then became ill, and then died not that long afterwards. He was, and his services things were in Atlanta. He touched so many people, and there's such an outpouring of emotions after he's died. And I think one of the things that's so important is whenever you ask Mr. I why you do art, is just to make people happy. And he talked about his great aunt, said he was going to be a minister, but Mr. I said he was a minister through his art, and he would communicate through his art. Mr. I was unbelievably generous, and I think it's another reason why people remember him. He was always giving gifts. Martha Henry very insightfully added a little section in the back on the gifts, and these are just some examples of things. He gave this sandstone on the camera to Sherry Eisenberg. I mean, it's just a fantastic piece, and completely personalized. What more can you ask? It happens to be a very good photo too. My wife asked him to make something for Maria Tesseras, who owns something called the Golden Needle. He didn't know her, but just by telling him what it was, he made this sandstone, he made the gold needle, he made this thread. After she got it, Mr. I called and said, "How did you like the thread?" So doing this just required incredible skill. It's not just that he was generous, he was incredibly talented. So there were shows that actually had been planned before he died that just went on. This one at Tubman. This was a show at Brower Museum that has Sherry and my collection. This was a show coordinated by Ramona Austin about fire and this symbolism of the fire. This show, I think, is still going on. This is a show in the West Coast that Martha Henry coordinated. And of course, then the Intuit show here. After he died at the House of Blues, they made this memory wall that others did to commemorate him. And these are just a series of images of Mr. I. He was young. This is him teaching. Here's the sandstone. This is him with Muhammad Ali. This is with his friend Jesse. This is in Clark Street, and of course with a younger pharaoh. If you ever happen to go up to the Ed Paschke Museum in Jefferson Park, on his work table, if you look carefully, there's a Mr. I card. So I don't know when Mr. I met Ed Paschke, they were in different shows together, but it's just sort of interesting that that would be prominently displayed in that studio. Here's Mr. I, the pharaoh. These hats are so heavy, the dog must have been heavy. Mr. I teaching again. Here's Mr. I with Norman Giordot, who is, as he would call himself, the wacky religion professor from Lehigh University. One of the things about Norman, I mentioned Diane LaBelle at the Banana Factory. Mr. I actually sort of got them together, and they got married, and Mr. I was the best man at the wedding. This is a sculpture by Larry Ballard of Mr. I. This is a toothbrush. This is a photo taken by Link Harper, and Intuit had a benefit for Mr. I shortly after the fire, and Mike Noland, one of our panelists, made this wonderful gouache of Mr. I as a piece to be auctioned, and it's just a wonderful example of Mike's work, but also really shows Mr. I to his best. Rings on his finger. Okay, so thanks to Mr. I for all he did for us. I think it's time for the panel. It's your show.
Well, I'll talk. Okay, we're waiting for Mike Noland to come back.
Yes, this is most
Just a few minutes. I'm going to ask a couple of questions of our research people here, and then take your questions. So we have about 20 minutes total. Yes? Okay. Okay.
Can we ask how many people are?
Sure, go ahead.
How many of you guys were friends of Mr. I?
Or doing it all.
Yeah, there's so many people that could have been on the panel.
So one of the things that I knew or assumed about Mr. Imagination is that a lot of people have his art because he was selling those sandstone things that said Cubs or your name or whatever outside of Wrigley Field for a while, and so they would would suppose that in Chicago, there are two artists that are widely collected by people, and that would be Lee Godey and Mr. Imagination. Because both of them were artists that were very visible and very accessible. The difference being, though, that Lee was not approachable in the same way that Mr. Imagination was. He was a lovely, gregarious man. So what Bob didn't say, but maybe both of you can take a couple of minutes to say how you met. So Mike, why don't you start?
Boy, I met Mr. Imagination in 1985, and I don't remember how it happened exactly, except for that I think there might have been an article in the Chicago Reader or something about him, or there was some kind of a notation about this guy who was on Clark Street, you know, that I think that was also about the same time as Carl Hammer started handling his work. I can't remember exactly, but we met at that time, and then he made a thing for my daughter, you know, a thing that had her name on it with a bird on it, and, you know, just like he did for everybody. I mean, he was so generous. But I was thinking that he also, a friend of mine curated a show in Milwaukee of African-American artists, and he was one of the artists she put on the show. And I took a photo of him. For some reason, she couldn't find a photo of him. I mean, now it seems impossible not to find a photo of him. But at that time, it was he wasn't photographed near as much as he later became photographed. But so I took a picture of him on my front stoop of my house on Glenwood, and she used it for the catalog. And, you know, we became friends. He talked to me about, you know, business trouble, you know, or, you know, how do you work with galleries? Things like that, and I told him it's very difficult, and it's not any easier for anybody than him. I mean, it's pretty rough for all of us, really.
So did you introduce him to other artists?
Oh yeah, one time, I feel like I'm picking up the whole thing here, but one time Roger Brown and Ray Yoshida and I were hanging out, and it was when Intuit did a show called Chairs, I think.
Oh yeah.
And they wanted to meet. They never met Mr. I. Weirdly enough, neither one of them had. But they also wanted to see the prison craft stuff that his brother made, the cigarette pack folded things. And his brother had actually made a chair that we ended up using in the chair show. That was like a really big chair. I think it was in one of those photos. And so, you know, I mean, that's pretty heavyweight people to take up to Mr. I's. And I called him up, and he was just like, well, bring him on, and, you know, we got together, and they enjoyed it. I mean, they were flabbergasted, you know, I mean, they'd never been there, they couldn't imagine, you know, how almost hoardish, like, the space was, you know, I mean, it was almost like stuff coming down on you, almost at times, and they enjoyed it, and he enjoyed it, and his brother, you know, his brother was a weird dude, man. I mean, that's all I can say. I mean, I liked his brother, but he was a lot different from Mr. I. Mr. I was a really sweet, gentle person, and his brother wasn't. That's all I can say about him.
Well, I met Mr. I in an unusual way. In 2000, the Art Institute had a show of historically African-American colleges, work from there. And as part of that show, the Art Institute organized a bus tour. And they took us to the Elliott Donnelly Youth Center, and they took us to the Southside Community Art Center. And there were two people there to educate us, and one was Mr. I, and the other was Bernard Williams. So that's the day I met Mr. I. So I met him then, and we went over, and this is my husband, you know him. We went over and bought some stuff, and then we didn't do that much. Then we got re-contacted with him in 2001, and then he moved away in 2002, and the majority of our friendship was after he left Chicago. So when he was mostly at the Bethlehem time, and I talked to him about 5 times a week on average during the Bethlehem time. So all these shows that Bob showed us, when people would come to him and ask him to do that, he would call me up right away, and he'd tell me the people, and I'd write down their names and addresses and phone numbers, and sure enough, he'd call me later, who was that person? So anyway, that's a little bit about our relationship.
You know, one of the things that Mr. I said about himself is he didn't consider himself an outsider. And you know, if we went by the strict definition of the term, I don't think that, you know, most of us would consider him an outsider either. But I wonder, and I would even open this to anybody who wants to answer, do you think that his work, that his art, could exist outside of the narrative of his life?
Outside of what?
The narrative of his life.
We know the trauma that he had.
Yes, yes. I mean, it plays, his story plays such a huge role in the discussion of the man and of the art.
Well, I've said before.
Is it,
that
yeah.
he was one of the most unluckiest people that I've ever known. I mean, he was one of the nicest, kindest people, but he attracted bad luck. Bad luck. I've thought about this a lot since he passed away, but he would call me up at random times in Paris or in Las Vegas or wherever it was, and my cell phone would ring, and he would say, "Hey, Mike, my briefcase just got stolen." This was in Las Vegas. I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I just set my stuff down, and then, you know, I turned around and my briefcase was gone." But I mean, these kind of things happened again and again. He would call me all the time. My apartment burned down. You know, I mean, it was like this ongoing train wreck of a thing, and it was horrible to watch because I don't know how these things happen, but it was a really bad, you know, luck. Is the only thing I can say is that he didn't do anything to cause it. It just happened that way.
And in the case of the fires, he wasn't even there.
Right. He wasn't
Well,
there.
luckily, because he would have been dead.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
yeah, but I'm saying it's not like, you know, he knocked over something. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like he left the stove
Right,
on and
right,
then
right.
the pot burned.
Right.
Well, what I wanted to say about all this trauma is, now, if I had all that trauma, I would want to, like, hide under the covers. But that's not what Mr. I did. He would arrange a trip to Paris.
Yes, that's true.
So, in his worst times, he was doing things like that. So, that's great. I mean, I don't consider myself an art critic, but I think he was a great artist, and his creativity and his art is something wonderful. Now, you know, in the marketing and the art world and all that, I don't know.
Well, one of the things about it is that if you looked at the art without knowing any of the story, you would never know that this is a man who had a black cloud hanging over his head.
That's true.
Because it's not evident in his art at all.
And he didn't like to talk about it.
Well, I can say on a few occasions, most of the time, he was one of the most optimistic people too. That's another thing. I mean, like, I might be having a downtime and be talking to him about, you know, I'm not so happy about this or that, and he would just say, well, you know, you just got to keep working. And I mean, he was always sort of positive. But I do remember a couple of times, especially after his brother died, being at Carl Hammer's in the back room, you know, just us sitting there talking, and he would get very emotional, and it was really rough on him. And I can remember him calling me in tears after the fires.
The last fire, yeah.
It was sort of like, it was just hard to, you know, to witness this person going through these things, you know.
One thing I would just say is that these three people are people who Mr. I confided in, so he wouldn't probably do the same with someone he didn't really know. And so because these people cared about him, they were the people who would get the phone call when he was having a bad time.
Yeah, I don't think he would ever tell anybody about his brother. I mean, that was a subject that was almost off of the, I don't think so.
Well, and when you talk to somebody 5 times a week, you know, life just kind of happens. And they tell you what happened that day.
Well, I have to say, I mean, there were times when I would get phone calls from him where I thought, oh my God, not Mr. I again. You know what I mean? I mean, he would call me and it would just just be like, oh, I look at the color ID and I just go, oh boy, I wonder what's happening now. You know, what has he gotten himself into? What has happened? Yeah, how much money does he need? What's happening? Do I want to buy another paintbrush or something? You know, I mean, that's the real truth about him. I mean, is at times he would, you know, he needed help. And you know, and they know they helped him out a lot. These two people over here helped him a whole lot. So did you.
Well, you were there till the very end.
So, yes, I was going to ask, does anybody want to answer the question?
Or say anything.
Well, I don't know if I'm answering or saying anything. As I listen to the question, it's sort of like, which came first, the egg or the chicken? I came into his life briefly, very briefly, when he was on Clark Street before he left Chicago. I heard about him and understood him to be an artist without the tragedy. And as I listened to you, that's why I'm thinking, is it the egg or the chicken? Which came first? He was an artist, I think, first. That's how I think many of us may experience him.
Well,
You have the intimacy of him.
He
So, but
did
the
tell
question
a story
was,
about when he was in the
because
coma.
of?
You know, when he got shot, he was in the coma for 6 weeks. He said to me at times that when he came out of that coma, like God had spoken to him, and that's when he started. He realized to create.
Yeah.
So there was a tragedy that
Spurred this on.
at first, and then he was very spiritual too. So the God message that he got, or whatever it was, you know, was very specific, and he started working right away.
So are you saying that prior to that, and this is
I'm
just for
not
my
sure.
clarity,
Yes.
prior
No, he
to
did make
that,
art
was he
before
an
that.
artist?
Yes.
He always made
Yes,
art.
because
Okay.
he was making signs and things for the church when he was.
But he became incredibly prolific after.
Yes, and he had a mission
I
where he
see.
felt like he was, you know,
Well,
it was
he
almost
was
like
a
divine inspiration. Really.
I see.
His grandmother made art, so it was in his family. Yeah,
So
yeah.
you didn't introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Shabette Williams. Hi, Shabette Williams is my name.
Shabbat?
Yes.
Does anybody else have a question or want to make a comment?
I was in Paris, I forget the date, but when the Chicago Outsider show was at Saint Pierre, you were there, Cleo. But I just have such fond memories of Mr. I in his hat and staff
And the
and
kids?
vest, walking the streets of Paris or at Gallery Lafayette. And just, he was like a piper. People would follow him, and kids. I mean, he had such a passion for young people, and I know as a result of that, Saint Pierre had him come back on a pretty regular schedule to do workshops and so on. But
And Suzanne never forgot Mr. I's birthday.
I think when you look at the show, you can see how much his work evolved. Because even when he first started with the bottle caps, you know, he just nailed them whole on blocks, you know, the blockhead looking things that you see in here. And then he started pounding them, but the whole shaping and using nails to create the thrones and the
Mirrors.
and it became such, he became so incredibly adept at it to an extent that, you know, greater than anybody else that I've ever seen. You know, I've seen bottle cap work, and most of it is fairly simplistic. It's not nearly as sophisticated as he became with it. And you know, he was on some kind of trajectory. He was continuing to change what he was creating, or, you know, he was, you know, he did the wire dresses. You know, he was always doing something more. And I just wondered if there's any hint of where he was going in his next stage of his creativity.
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, I think it would have depended on what he ran into. You know, the fish, the tin fish and the copper fish were because somebody had that material.
That's right.
So he could work with any material.
Yes.
So it would just depend what was presented to him. And he could do it any place. I mean, he did it on trains, he did it on buses, he did it in
Right.
hotel rooms.
I wanted to talk about one thing, is when I met him in 1985, he was a different person, and so was I, obviously, but what I'm saying is, like, he wasn't the Mr. Imagination who became a celebrity, the flamboyant guy who wore the ball cap vest and the hats, and he was just another artist at the time. I mean, he didn't look like he later became. He grew into this persona eventually, and eventually it became like when you were hanging out with him, it was like hanging out with a celebrity or something. It was like, you know, people would come up to him, and, you know, children or whatever. I mean, it was totally different than 30 years before when he was just a guy coming over to hang out with another artist. I mean, it was interesting to watch because he really grew into it, and he really was good at it, I think.
And he loved being the center of attention.
He did, yeah.
He
was
loved
really good.
dressing up. And I remember when he went to that thing where he was wearing the hazel contact
Yes,
lenses.
I just told that story last week. It
You know,
freaked me out.
changed his eye color. It was like-
I walked in one time to Carl Hemmers, and I looked at him, and I don't know if he was wearing some. His face looked totally different. He had on these, were they bluish color or hazel?
Hazel, I
But
think.
but his eyes were brown. But anyway, he had these weird eyes, and it almost looked like a science fiction character. I mean, it didn't look like the man I was used to seeing, and I was just looking like, what the hell
He
is
started
going on here?
leaves and
Yeah, he started getting really
hair
dressed up. And,
extensions.
yeah. He definitely started getting into the fashion and
Right.
presenting himself in a different way than
Totally
he had
different
before.
way.
Yeah. And he talked in a different way, and he became something else different.
But I've seen him be that way and then be more of a person. So he didn't always walk around in his regalia.
No, that's true.
But sometimes when he wasn't wearing his regalia, he would wear his pieces
Yes.
and go into restaurants and bars and interact with people and
Well,
talk
everybody
about
knew
the
him.
work.
Everybody.
Well, I'm talking actually even in Bethlehem.
Oh, in Bethlehem.
They didn't
Oh, okay.
know him, and that was more
He
unusual.
was kind of hard to miss, I would imagine.
Hi, I'm Christine. What happened to the massive amounts of art that we saw in his various abodes? Obviously, some of it is at the Smithsonian, some of it is in your homes, but there was enough there for the world.
They ran storage lockers.
Yeah.
And who is in charge of it?
Don't know.
Nobody.
I don't know, but at times I paid for it, at times Cleo paid for it.
Well, he
So-
would call you up and say, I need money for
Whatever,
store
a lot of
room or
things.
whatever.
So yeah, the parent was doing a storage locker, you know, and he would say, they're gonna sell everything, you know, there's gonna be an auction.
Yeah.
There was gonna be an auction after he died, I don't know what happened.
I never heard of it.
I don't think has happened.
As
So
far as
it's
I know,
still
it
in
hasn't.
storage?
Could be.
Lenny?
Keith Sharp is in charge of his estate in Atlanta, and they're still going. They found dozens of storage lockers after he passed,
Yes, not
and
one.
they're still
Who-
going through
who
them.
is-
It's like Vivian
Well,
Mayer.
his family.
His name is
Trying to
Keith
own
Sharp.
you know, his store.
In
No
Atlanta.
relation?
I don't know the relation. I know he's in charge of the estate, and he loaned us a couple pieces to the show. But in talking to him, they're still trying to figure out what is all there.
His mother put in charge.
Yeah, I don't know the
Well,
relationship.
it's good to know that somebody is in charge anyway.
But nothing's being done.
Not yet.
I just wondered, what were his sleep habits?
Oh. He didn't sleep a lot. He worked.
Couldn't have.
He worked, and he was fast. And he actually, starting in his teens, he didn't sleep in a bed because his work overtook his bed. In the Tom Patterson piece that was done for the Terror Show, which is really the best piece, it talks about Mr. I and his teens getting too much stuff and sleeping under the dining room table.
Oh, by the way, Tom Patterson told me to tell everybody that he sends his blessing, or, you know, he wish he was there.
Well, we
I
did-
talked to him just yesterday,
Oh, good.
so he wanted to let everybody know that he's here in spirit. I think that the only other person I ever met like Mr. I was Howard Finster, who would sleep maybe 1 or 2 hours at a stretch and then work, and then, I mean, they're the only 2 people I can think of that work that sort of, I don't know what you would call it, but obsessively kind of, you know, catch naps and then get up and work again. Most people that I've known have fairly normal lives as far as sleeping goes and eating and that sort of thing, but Mr. I was different, and so was Howard. You know, I mean, there were different kind of cats, you know, from every other cat. So.
Any other questions or comments? And I don't know how much time we have left, but
How long was it supposed to go?
We have about maybe 10 minutes.
so I would encourage you to look at the show. If you have it.
Oh, like, like 40 minutes before the show closes.
Okay, yeah.
Well, listen, does anybody have any other questions, or did anybody meet him, or I was just wondering other people's impressions of him, where that maybe only met him once or something. Yes?
I met him a long time ago. He came to my school, we talked to the kids, and we went to his studio, but I'm wondering if, and a friend of mine has some of his pieces, if any of you have a really, really special piece that you want to say something about, that really means something to you, or you found a place in your home, or something, maybe Sherry or somebody.
Well, we have 100. 35 of them are here. My husband is very modest. He didn't identify the pieces that were ours in the show, but it's a lot of them. I think a piece that I've written about and talked about is a small piece that's here. It's not necessarily my favorite, but I think it's the most important in our relationship. And the day before Mr. I was moving to Bethlehem, we went to his house on Clark Street. And Mr. I was a procrastinator. He was going to be packing all night. But we told him we were going the next day to Bob's mother's 80th birthday. And he said, well, I'm going to make her piece and I'm going to send it. She's going to get it tomorrow. And I'm like, right, right. You know, you're packing all night. You're going to make this piece. You're going to send it. But actually, it wasn't tomorrow. It was the next day at 11 o'clock. So he made this, Bob's mother's birthday happens to be on Valentine's Day. So it's a Valentine and it says happy birthday. And he sent it at his own expense. We didn't ask him to do it. So that really started our
So it's this piece here.
yeah, very special relationship. It's two-sided, isn't it?
I don't think it's just.
Anyway, yeah, it's,
I
so
think one
see,
of-
was Valentine, again, appropriate,
Yeah.
special, Valentine's Day.
I think one of the things is, we knew what was important to Mr. I. I mean, he estimated 30,000 pieces of art. And so things that had special significance to him were the burnt pieces. And so, you know, particularly the one that's called the African Queen was something that, you know, before it burned, he thought it was something really special. But after it burned, it just had, you know, sort of a mystical importance to him. I think he did all these self-portraits, but I think he felt more attached to the women. And one of the things he always did when he had a woman, he'd always be holding a purse, because women always hold a purse.
Yeah, they always
And so I think when he talked to us about pieces, he would talk more about the women than the men, and the men were all self-portraits of them. So
And they all had big boobs. You know, they're grandmotherly with big boobs.
I don't know what significance that has.
Big boobs. The women.
One thing I wanted to talk about was a little bit, Bob mentioned it earlier in his talk, is that I remember talking to Mr. I and him talking about moving, about this need to get out of these places where tragedies happened. I mean, it was almost like a spiritual thing after his brother passed away, after the fire, after this and these different episodes. It almost seemed like it freed him or lightened something for him to do that. Or he just shifted gears and went to the next place. I'm not sure. but it was very part of who he was. It was almost like just the way he dealt with things. I mean, a guy who had a lot of tragedy, he would just bounce off of it and go to the next thing somehow.
Did he leave a lot behind when he moved?
I have no idea
You
about
mean
that.
work?
Yes.
You mean artwork? Well, there was all these storage facilities all over the place.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so he couldn't
So he
take it
didn't
all.
actually pack all of that and move it?
Well, he packed and moved a lot of it. I mean, there was a lot.
Yeah.
And when he got to the new place, did his art change?
Well, it did. When he got to Pennsylvania, there was a piece, Walking Man's in the show, isn't it?
Yeah.
Walking Man.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a piece where he found the wood
Right.
and it had movement. And that was a big change.
Yeah, I noticed that, Mr. Cole.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was also great at making environments.
Yeah.
So when he would move into a new home, at the beginning, it would be kind of clean, not clean in the dirty sense, but clean in the
Not cluttered.
Not
cluttered.
cluttered. Right.
But before too long, he would make more and more pieces, and there would be a lot more stuff there. Then a crew would be coming to make a film, and he would have to straighten it up overnight, and we'd say, how in the world is he going to do that? And he would do it. You know,
Well, he had the energy of 10 men. I mean,
He did,
I mean,
yeah.
he was like incredible that way. I mean, he would always talk to me about upcoming events, projects, whatever it was, and I would go, "What? You're going to do how many pieces by when?" I mean, he would do it. It was amazing. I mean, like, you know, I'm a fairly slow worker, and I mean, he was very prolific and very fast. And
Were a lot of the things, we saw a lot of his art, but were there found objects that he brought home also?
oh yes,
Oh, yeah.
he was a junk collector,
Yeah.
basically.
So a lot of the antiquing was found objects, I would say. Yeah.
but like these
And trading.
the installations
trading.
that he did other places, he would always have the community, primarily kids, bring in things that were important to them.
Oh, okay.
And then they would place them in the wall. He would, I don't know if he would teach them or he would tell them to do it, but that was very important to him. He really was kind and dear and wanted to make other people happy.
Back to the thing you asked, somebody asked earlier if there was a special piece that we own or something. And the piece that I have by him is the piece I never got. He and I were always talking, he always loved to trade with artists, and we were always talking about, well, I mean, he never picked out a thing, I never picked out a thing. I mean, I do have some of his work, but I'm just saying, the last time I saw him, he gave me a wood carving, which was very weird, because he didn't really carve in wood that much. And he said, I was thinking of you, and I wanted you to have this, and it's on our shelf at home. But I'm just saying, like, for some reason, it was one of those things where I always expected him to be around. He was, I mean, you don't think that time's going to run out. And in fact, I was thinking today when I was watching Bob's talk, I keep waiting for the phone to ring. I mean, it's hard for me to realize that he's gone, actually, at times.
Paul has
That reminds me of my, I was over visiting one time, and this has been quite a while ago, I guess. And I really admired one of the feather duster things, and I said, I'd really like to buy one of those from you. He goes, oh no, he says, you know what, these are for a special show. And so I said, well, if I brought you some, would you make one for me that I would buy from you? And he said, oh, they have to be old, you couldn't find them. So the next time I saw him, I brought him a bouquet of them, you know. And then, you know, we kept collecting them for him, so time passed, and now we've got another big bouquet of them in our guest room.
Well, he was the kind of person that if he was in your car and you're driving down the street and he sees something on the side of the road, he'd be like, pull over. You know, I mean, it's just like, you know, it didn't matter. I mean, if he saw potential in something, that's the way it was. You know, like, let's get that. You know, well, I got a van.
I don't know which one is yours.
Both of them.
They're both of those, ours, and the best is ours also. Yeah, the best is ours.
My favorite piece, the first piece of Mr. Imagination art that I collected at all were little tiny paintbrushes, you know, very delicate, and I wouldn't loan them because they're fragile. One of them was broke. It was 3. They were on a thing, and now it's only 2. And and I don't let them stand up anymore. But right during, when Somalia was all in the news, it was before the piracy stuff. This was, when it was starvation and, it was Black Hawk Down, that movie.
Right.
It was all of that. And he created the piece that's out there, that totem pole, which he called Women of Somalia. And it's all these women's heads. And he made those dreadlocks with the bottle caps. This one, yeah. And it's really tall and it's incredibly heavy. As Linda knows. But it has bottle caps and buttons and the plaster. I mean, it's all of his and the paint, the whisk brooms, and it's all of his things are all in that one piece. And so it's really nice example of his work, and it's. Because it's so big, it's something that everybody sees when they come in my house. And so I remember I was having some electrical work done, and the guy was in there and he was looking around and he said, "I've never seen a place with this much art before." He said, "What is all this stuff?" And he was, really struck by the total.
It's great. It's great. Yes.
Are those
Can I share a story
cemented on?
about him? I think, is that okay? Can I tell you a story about him?
Sure.
My family owned a statuary business at Milwaukee and Grand Avenue. And he used to always be around there, like from when I was a kid. And we make classical statues and stuff like that. So he didn't really fit in, but he'd find arms and, And one day he was digging through the thing and, he was a real nice guy and we liked him. And I had an old face of David, David by Michelangelo. And I go, "I think you'd like this, And he took it like a kid and he goes, "Oh, this is so great, He showed up the next day and he had decorated the whole thing. And his face was African American. He had these big white eyes and big long lashes. So you can picture a David mask from Michelangelo. I was like real young at the time. I was like, 20 or something. And I go, "Man, this is the most amazing thing." He was just so proud of it. It was sad to see it wasn't here, And it's a piece that no one ever saw.
Did he give it to you?
No.
You don't know where it is?
No.
Well, one of the things that he always said after he made something is he would say, "Isn't it great?"
I love that. Fantastic.
You were never given an option. Adjective.
Did he cement these?
I have no idea.
Oh, you don't?
When I saw, when he first was working in the paintbrushes, he was using wood putty, which is a highly toxic, foul stuff, but, it's used for repair, right?
Well, he used wood putty, he used plaster, he used Bondo. I mean, he would use any kind of thing.
But the wood putty, he would just watching it, it seems like it would just come out of his hand into a face.
Yeah, he could take anything and mold it and then...
It was just so, and like you said, somebody said, fast. So, he would have a whole thing of brushes lined up and just go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, doing faces, and then he would, decorate them. And it was like an assembly line.
The first piece of any type that he made was very special to him. And it took me a long time to get this. He would say, that was the first one. And I think the first one came down from somewhere. I mean, if I were making a piece, it would take me till about the third time to iron out the bugs, but that's not how it worked with him. And so his first one would be really special, and the second one would be special, the third one would be a little less special, and then he'd knock them out.
It's like a Xerox machine. The first copy is pretty good. The second one is okay. And then by the time it gets to about the 10th.
Except they're all different.
Yeah, that's true. But I think
in this piece, there's a core cylinder that he found. So he found something, then he built around it. So the things are affixed to the cylinder, and how he did that, I don't know. But it's not like those are stacked. There's a core to it.
Right. And what's amazing is he's an opportunist artist, you know?
Well, it's sort of like Picasso in a way. I mean, they take found objects and can transform them, and their vision is what he was really good at. I mean, I can't even imagine any kind of material that he couldn't have worked with, really. I can't imagine that you wouldn't have handed him a bolted fabric and come back a week later.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. It's like, there's, you know, well, for me it's very limited, but I'm just saying, like, with him, you could give him a roll of pennies and come back the next week, and those pennies would be...
Oh, no, it would be the next...
day, yeah, or the
Well,
next
not
morning.
even that.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, you could give him copper wire, you could give him anything, it didn't matter what you gave him, or he would transform it and make it into his vision, which is what all the great artists do anyway, so.
Where did he keep his clothes?
Did he keep...
Where?
I have no idea.
He slipped under the dining room table. Where did he?
I don't know, but I do know that instantly after he got them, he would get paint on them. So they didn't stay nice very long.
I have a crazy story to tell. At the Intuit Gala, a few years before he passed away, when he did those big dress forms that we all...
He was the honoree, yes.
Yes, he was the honoree, and he was very proud, and I took some pictures of him dancing with these dress forms at the party, and there were some other pictures taken that night. It was a really great night for him. I took him and his sisters back to his hotel where he was staying at, and he wanted me to look at
He
these...
was making that dress at
He
the
did the
hotel
dress
right
in-
before.
Well, here's what was scary. As I go into this, he asked me to come into his room. I go in there, and there's paint all over the bedspread. Paint, particle, plaster wood. I mean, shit was everywhere. And I was just going like, what are they going to say when they come and see this room? I mean, and he's just acting like it's normal, But
Well, it was normal.
it was normal for him, but I was thinking like, I wonder if Intuit's paying for this. Because somebody's going to pay for this room, at some point. But he didn't care. I mean, that's just the way it worked, man.
Well, I don't know that it was he didn't care. He didn't understand what he was
He didn't pay
doing.
attention.
He didn't pay attention. I don't mean he
That
didn't care.
was normal.
Right.
He
I
probably
think Deb has to
spray
make an
painted.
announcement.
Yeah.
With that wonderful story, Mike, I just want us all to thank our panel for a terrific